Monolith Productions, best known for titles like Fear, where tiny girls could scare the crap out of you, probably not as well known, but the original creators of Blood, which you'd have to be as old as Pepperidge himself to remember, and most famously, I had to remind myself that they did in fact make this game, the brains behind Shadows of Mordor, famous for being a standalone Lord of the Rings Uruk-hai assassination simulator whose canonicity is a bit questionable. Monolith's portfolio of genres reaches pretty far and wide for a lot of players to enjoy. Too bad we'll never see a game from them again, since I guess Warner Brothers thought they weren't meeting their sales expectations. But a particular title from them that's hitting 20 years old and was originally a launch title for the Xbox 360 was Condemned: Criminal Origins, a first-person murder hobo horror game that you can no longer purchase anywhere online now that it's been delisted, and I have no idea why, really made an impact on the 360's debut, assuming you could get past the Red Ring of Death. The disturbing atmosphere, visceral combat, and psychological story ensured players could have a frightful time with their newly acquired bricking machine. So, after 20 years, plus remembering that I never actually finished the game back then because I had to return it to Blockbuster, what's it like to play Condemned today?
Why do they always have to kill in such maggot-infested dumps?
Condemned's story is meant to be a psychological mystery that keeps you at the edge of your seat, but is kind of hit and miss with its storytelling. Ethan Thomas, one of many Ethans in video games, is an agent of the FBI who has been tasked with solving a recent homicidal murder identified to be a serial killer called the Matchmaker.
Exact same MO as the others?
It's the work of a guy we've been calling the Matchmaker. Kills young women violently, poses them in grisly tableau with male department store mannequins.
Before Ethan can get anywhere with the crime scene, the investigators realize that there is someone else stalking the location, and their best solution was to search for them, but end up falling victim to them instead.
And the path takes strange turns.
Police! Drop the weapon now!
Moments later, Ethan, suffering from visions because this wouldn't be a horror game otherwise, wakes up in his apartment to find Malcolm Van Horn, a friend of the family, watching over him and relaying to Ethan that the police suspect that he shot his fellow officers.
The detectives?
They're dead. Shot with your weapon. And you will be blamed for their deaths.
With no other choice, he goes on the run and attempts to clear his name by finding the killer who framed him. But things are never that easy, as Ethan's attempts to clear his name end up with him going down the psychological rabbit hole that's more than he bargained for. Very much a I've been framed, therefore I must clear my name narrative, and I will say the game does a good enough job with establishing the premise from the get-go. Albeit I find it hard to believe that two officers of the law could ragdoll so easily upon getting shot. Ethan appears to be believable enough as the main protagonist that's trying to come to terms with his current situation. I at least appreciate that he's not completely stupid.
Do you understand?
Yes. No. What do you want from me, Malcolm? What's going on?
And while I think the premise has a solid start with setting up the story, it's the way the horror is trying to tie into its main plot point that doesn't feel all that exciting to watch. See, the game leads you to believe that there is more going on to Ethan's psyche than what his normal appearance would suggest. It's basically hinted that he has some hidden powers that lets him understand the killer's actions, as well as the game indicating that there are darker forces at work who Ethan is connected to. But the reasons for those occurrences are never explained, nor given any context to be meaningful to the story. There's a scene where Ethan's forensic partner Rosa reveals that he has abnormal conditions in his body that she found from his personnel file.
During your last physical, they found several abnormalities. For starters, your bone and muscle densities are off the chart. You have a reputation for being tough, but who knew?
After that, nothing about it is explained whatsoever, and you actually have to play the sequel to find out what it all means. Most egregious of all is the game's ending. Just a reminder for spoilers, so watch at your own risk, but you're not really missing much with the game's story. When it's revealed that the person who framed Ethan is in fact a serial killer who actually kills other killers, that's a mouthful to say, including the matchmaker at the start of the game, Ethan follows him to an abandoned orchard farm where they settle things once and for all. Upon getting betrayed by Van Horn, who I totally did not see coming from 100 miles away, and finding out that the killer is his nephew, Serial Killer X, as he has been dubbed, was not inherently crazy, but a result of the evil forces whom Van Horn tells Ethan is the reason behind his nephew's killing spree, and all the craziness that's been going on in the city.
Quickly! You must find and destroy it. It has caused all this madness. Go! Kill it, now!
Without any build-up, without any implication, nor a hint of foreshadowing, we are suddenly told that the true antagonist was a martial arts pinhead this entire time. After he tells us this, we have no other recourse but to simply go to the BDSM man and beat his ass. Furthermore, the final segment of the game has you choose whether or not Van Hort's nephew should live. What's worse is that the choice doesn't actually matter. Even if you don't shoot, he manages to pull a gun out and shoot himself instead. It doesn't even affect the final scene of the game either, despite blatantly telling you what to do. How does it end? With compassion? Revenge? You've got 5 seconds, and you're telling me this in Arial font? And when the game does end, the final reasoning for everything is a cult.
Yeah, I've been better. You said you found something interesting?
Yes, very odd. A cult seems to be behind all this. We can tie them to the deaths of the serial killers investigated by your department.
I get it. Questions, which leads to more questions, is a great way to create mystery, but when its relevance is put into question, see what I did there? It doesn't feel cohesive. Even Monolith's other game, Fear, follows a similar story path with its protagonist, but it at least makes everything feel relevant when it's connected to the villain and the overarching story. A decent foundation that could have been worked better, but by far the weakest element in Condemned's package.
Come one, come all folks, to first-person combat gameplay, where you'll get to do many things like hitting, parrying, and hitting some more.
A first-person brawler with the occasional shooter, Condemned's gameplay is very straightforward. For 95% of it, you'll be duking it out with the various crazy murder hobos, plus some mutants from Genosha, using a variety of different melee weapons, your overpowered taser, and sometimes gun. Your main attack lets you swing, and your secondary attack lets you block, which will momentarily stun your opponent. You also get a taser, which is pretty much the best thing in the game, because it lets you get a swing in, and Ethan gets a kick attack, which I have never once thought was useful. It also replaces your jump, which feels very weird to not have in an FPS. Well, I guess this is Mark King's field if anything. You get a flashlight, which you will never turn off willingly, considering the lighting, and a set of tools for finding evidence, which you'll need to perform your job. At its core, the melee combat of Condemned is pretty fun for the most part. Very visceral with trying to get up close and personal with the enemies, and very rewarding if you can time your blocks properly to not get hit. They'll even try to trip you up with feint attacks that feel similar to every From Software boss that loves to delay their swings. There's even some nuances, like being able to disarm the enemy after using your taser, which is a nice bit of tech you can perform. But I stopped doing it because they have command grabs that hurt way more than they should. What's cool about the system is the weapon variety. There's quite a good number of objects that you can use as blunt instruments, each with their own stats like damage, speed, block, and reach. I found a lot of them to be quite advantageous in combat, so you could easily find your preferred weapon. Hell, it even looks cool when the enemies are just running around to pry a weapon from the environment and getting ready to smack you. Very thematic to the murder hobo bit. I did find blocking to be pretty important though, so I much preferred the weapons that were quicker on the parry, usually the faster ones. It pretty much helped with dominating 1v1s. Plus, the timing on the heavier weapons didn't feel right, and I never could land it properly. So I stuck with laying pipe. On the occasion that you do get guns, They feel fun to use because of how limited they are, making them one-time use weapons that you can take advantage of as the enemies fall victim to your bullets. When you run out of ammo, you can always just pick up the enemies after you've John Wicked them. I also like that the game balances the enemies a bit by having them occasionally attack each other. If you're good at blocking, you could easily take out 2 enemies at once. But it's nice to know that there is no honor among murder hobos. My one issue with the combat is how repetitive it started to feel from start to finish. Similar to how Fear kind of suffers from gameplay evolution, there's little in the way of Condemned's enemy variety, and your combat agenda largely remains the same for each level. Pretty much whack them till they're dead. There's the occasional ground crawlers and some other creepy looking enemies, I guess, but nothing that feels substantial to make you evolve or change how combat should be tackled. By the end of the game, my tactics felt the same from the start. It also doesn't help that Ethan is slow when using the stairs. Like, painfully slow. It is intentional, and the movement in general is a good fit for the combat pacing. But when it comes to getting around or moving from level to level, it is quite sluggish. Also, it's weird that the game decided to have an execution style mechanic. I guess because they wanted to up the gritty violence, but it feels so random and out of place with no real benefit either. Plus, it's not good for speedrunning. I'd say a pretty fun and uncomplicated combat that anyone can have fun with without having to sweat it out, Dark Souls style. Sekiro players may be left wanting. One weird drawback that is more of a personal issue with me is that the gameplay did not make me think the game was scary at all. The thing is, when you make combat semi-fun or have mechanics like parrying, I really have nothing to be afraid of because I can easily fight back without fear. You could make the argument that it's an old game, but even I find the original Silent Hill games to be way scarier than Condemned. On the other side of gameplay is the forensics, which amounts to the game telling you when to take out your tools and simply press a few buttons to collect evidence. While very thematic for Ethan as a forensics investigator, it's extremely simple to perform and barely counts as anything that would merit a puzzle interaction. It feels like it's more important for the story, and you're simply there to press a few buttons to make it so. Except for maybe one section which actually felt like a proper puzzle. Lastly, there's the optional collectible objectives like the engraved metal parts, CRT TV findings, and the grossest collectible scavenger hunt that I've ever seen in a video game, dead birds. I know you're a crime scene forensics expert, Ethan, but what the actual Well, at least it unlocks some artwork and behind-the-scenes footage. All in all, pretty fun despite the lack of gameplay evolution from start to finish. Not the most complex brawler out there, but one that can keep you on your toes due to its tense, visceral, in-your-face fighting. Probably best on controller, so you can sit back and relax without having to go into shrimp mode for your mouse and keyboard.
Thomas, you have looked into the face of hate, the visage of evil. Know that hate is in your soul, too.
Condemned is obviously a graphical product of its time, and there's a lot to be desired if you're looking at it through modern RTX eyes. That said, one of the things I fondly remember when playing this game back on the 360 was how gorgeously dark and realistic it tried to look. The models themselves are stretched, yes, and better detail is to be desired, but they at least had enough moving parts to make it look good back then. The background assets are pretty disjointed though, and you can tell that this game is meant for enclosed environments. The lighting system, I'd say, is still pretty good, enough that the horror atmosphere still shines well today. Some dynamic casting from the more static lights whenever objects are in front of them, and good spatial lighting that make areas look more ominously dark where appropriate. Nothing too advanced, but impressive nonetheless for an Xbox 360 launch title. Model animations are still quite impressive. The way the enemies react to getting hit, taking weapons from the environment, and just the way they move doesn't feel as old as it should be. Some animations do look like they get recycled a bit too much.
Nope.
Sound is actually one of the best things about this game, with the way it builds atmosphere. There's barely any musical tracks at all, save for some cutscenes and a few gameplay segments, but it's the way the game uses its noises and effects to make everything feel quiet and unnerving that makes walking through environments very daunting. A certain tension in the silence while you wait for the next murder hobo to jump at you. Though the one soundtrack that's played for the menu gives a very detective mystery vibe that is kinda catchy. But when all of its graphical aspects are combined together, the scarier scenes and psychological bits create a creepiness that is uniquely Condemned. Oh, but if you're familiar with the game's bugs, then you'll know that there are two glaring issues that you have to get fixed in order to get it to run. The first is the frame rate, which you can easily find a fix online, and the other is the missing sounds, which I've actually never fixed because I just powered through the awkwardly quiet train segment. Other than that though, the game ran completely fine for me, save for some weird glitches that made me question whether they were almost deliberate. Almost. A decently presentable game that still manages to maintain its dark mood. One that I do appreciate for its technicalities despite the age.
Come on, let's go. Body's rotten as we speak.
Condemned isn't that bad. Not the best, but unique enough that it feels like its own worthwhile horror experience, if that's what you're looking for. Decently fun hand-to-hand combat, dated but impressive atmosphere, and a pretty forgetful story are some of the things I took away from playing this game again. I'm definitely of the opinion that it was meant to be a launch showcase for the Xbox 360, especially due to the emphasis on its visual atmosphere. A game that feels like it's more style than substance. But there is still the biggest elephant caveat in the room, being that the game is no longer available for purchase on any online platform. November 2025 at the time of this video. I don't exactly know the details as to why, either due to Monolith no longer existing, or the current publisher Sega just pulling the plug on the IP. Maybe there's something else going on behind the scenes, but until some kind of statement is said, it's been delisted as of Halloween 2025. Spooky. But whether or not this type of game is fun depends on you. I'm happy to have finally played it again and finished it, and I still recommend it for players who are remotely interested. But I do think it is more of a product of its time, and my only way back to playing it again is potentially a remake. But that's gonna do it for today, guys. Thanks for sticking around. There will be more games to play and more videos coming soon, so please stay tuned if you'd like to see more. But for now, I'll see you all next time.